Earlier this week, the White House Business Council held a briefing at the White House, and Madison was well represented. We'll talk to participants this morning on For the Record. Good morning, I'm Neil Heinen. The briefing was to discuss President Obama's economic policies, and roughly 40 business representatives from around the U.S. were invited. 8 of them were from the Greater Madison Chamber of Commerce, including Chamber President Zach Brandon, Wayne Harris, President of 6am Marketing, and Scott Seymour, Vice President of Corporate and Regulatory Affairs for American Family Insurance. Welcome to For the Record. Thank you all very much for joining me this morning. Zach, how did this come about? What was
Well, we had Jason Furman, the White House chairman of the Economic Advisors, about a month ago, and he was in town to see Becky Blank, the new chancellor, and they were doing an event at the Institute for Discovery. And the White House called and said, would you guys be interested in doing an event with some business leaders? And it was really a test, I think, to see, could we deliver a good round table with a diverse group of businesses.
The 40 of you.
Right.
Yep.
Well, and it was well attended. It got great feedback. I mean,
had they not done this before?
They hadn't done anything like this with us before. And so we've started to develop a partnership with the White House Business Council, an organization called Business Forward, and the Greater Madison Chamber to make sure that the voice of our business community is being heard at the federal level. And when you think about chambers of commerce, you usually think local politics, and that's where people are used to seeing us be most active. But over the last year, we've gotten a lot more active at the state level, and now hopefully we hope to carry the message to the federal level. I think this has just been the first 2 of what I hope will be many opportunities for us to discuss.
Were these all chambers?
No. In fact, I think there might have been a smaller Latino chamber that was there from somewhere else, I think from Missouri maybe, but we were the only other chamber in the room. But most of our delegation were business leaders from, I was the only chamber member, chamber staff member there. Everybody else was an actual chamber member and a business leader.
Wayne, I mean, these things always come together at the last minute. I mean, that's just, that's the way government works. So what made you decide to go along, and what did you go looking to get out of it?
Well, I had some issues that I had questions about when the opportunity came up, I said, this is great. I have an opportunity to talk right to the people that can make a difference, and was able to throw questions at them. Fortunately, I have a good staff, so they covered for me while I was gone. But it was a wonderful opportunity, and it was a good opportunity to hear what Obama's people had to say about what's going on. We always hear, I guess, we never really get to talk directly to them. This was an opportunity to do that.
Maybe we should make clear, who were you talking to?
Well, it was a pretty, I'm not going to remember everybody, but it was a pretty diverse group.
How many people were?
So they brought in sort of panelists. I mean, they brought in sort of a wave of different panelists that came into the room. Right. But the highlights, and you guys, if there was a highlight for you that I'm not mentioning, please remind me. But I thought one of the interesting talks was the Chief Information Officer for the United States government. So there's the guy who's responsible for pushing technology into the federal government. Used to be Bill Gates' personal assistant. Had a great joke. He said, when we launched XP, Windows XP, I had no idea it'd still be waiting for me at the White House in 2009. And so they were really behind. He talked about having, President Obama was the first BlackBerry using emailing president, and so they had to adjust all their systems, and that their email system was down 40% of the time before they came in, and there were just a lot of interesting changes.
Let's just make clear, this is not the guy that's responsible for the for the IT healthcare thing, right?
No, I don't think
this is the White House.
Although there was somebody there from HHS. So talk about that.
This is the White House IT.
Immigration reform. Economic oversight, sort of broad economic overview, Office of Budget Management, business engagement.
International trade.
That's right.
They talked about the fact that 95% of the customers in this world are outside the United States, and it's a huge opportunity. For all of us to take a look at that.
Yeah, I want to talk about that a little bit later, because Zach and I have been talking about the January Madison magazine is going to feature a story on global Madison and how much of the business opportunities are really global. But does AmFam have a presence out in Washington just in general?
Yeah, we have 2 individuals that are, I guess for lack of a better term, registered federal lobbyists out there. They go out there on a fairly regular basis and discuss issues with our congressional delegation in the states where we do business, and also meet fairly regularly with members of Congress, staff.
I mean, I think that's true with all the big players in the healthcare discussion in the United States. But you saw an opportunity for the company to go out yourself and thought it was worthwhile.
Yeah, absolutely. And I, I was very encouraged that this administration saw the value in bringing business and bringing government together to talk about ideas and ways that we can work together to ultimately improve the economy and hopefully create jobs. And I think the other thing that we were interested in having a discussion about and conveying the message on was to help Washington understand that when they're proposing regulations, that they carefully analyze what the impact of those regulations are on businesses, because there is a cost usually associated with passing regulations. That cost is passed on to consumers who are ironically the very people that folks out in Washington are trying to protect. So,
and that message was a theme throughout the day.
I think there was I can't speak for the other companies there, although I think we probably had the largest delegation there. There were other other companies from around the country that were there, but I think there was a message of be cognizant of the impact of what you do, and I think for us what was tremendous was we brought a great cross-section of our own economy. So we had tremendous high-profile major employers like AmFam, but 6AM Marketing, which is Wayne's involvement in the small business part of our economy has been sort of long and tested and very been very successful there. But we also had Marsha Lindsay from Lindsay Stone and Briggs. Yep. We had Michael Best was represented. Alliant Energy was there. Endress Manufacturing out of Wanakee was there. And
good mix.
Yep. And so you really saw a good cross section of our economy, both size and industry. But I think the message was sort of overall very similar, which was we appreciate the opportunity to engage. We appreciate the opportunity to be invited to engage. This was the first opportunity to maybe not have hard deliverables, but to really start to float ideas, particularly what Scott was saying, which was figure out how to engage with us so that when you are thinking about legislation, let us tell you and help you understand the impact it will have on the business community and ultimately on consumers, because it doesn't just stop on the business.
All right, we're going to talk more about the president's economic policies and Madison's involvement in them when we come back right after this. Our discussion this morning stems from a meeting last Monday at the White House with the White House Business Advisory Council, and at that meeting, 7 members of the Greater Madison Chamber of Commerce, including President Zach Brandon, who joins me this morning, along with Scott Seymour, Vice President of Corporate and Legal Affairs at American Family Insurance, and Wayne Harris, the President of 6AM Marketing. Did you get any sense, Wayne, I'm going to just get all of your impressions about this, of sort of Madison's business community in the context of the issues that were discussed? Sort of how we're dealing with those issues, how we compare maybe with other communities, just from your impressions of who else was there?
Number one, it was nice that we had such a large delegation there.
Yeah, I mean, that seems pretty impressive.
Yeah, nobody had as many people there as we did. And, I think, number one, I want to thank Zach, because he really is the one that made this happen and got on the phone and got us the invitation there. But, I think you hear some of the same issues in other communities that we have, whether it's discussing the immigration reform, the Health Care Act, world trade. All other of the folks that were there had some of the same issues that we did. So, I get the sense that we're a part of a much larger opportunity to work with government.
Now, feel free to tell me if this isn't true, but don't you think it's significant that we got 8 slots out of the 40?
And we actually only were offered 5.
I mean, does that mean
we called and said we had
Does that mean anything or not?
I think it means that we've proven that we can deliver high quality interaction and engagement, and which was one of our goals. I mean, when you and I sat on this set a year ago, this month, I said one of our goals was to put us on a global and national stage, and
right.
this is exactly the manifestation of that. And so I'm not surprised by it. I'm excited about where it heads, but I also think it's, they want true engagement. Right? They don't want a room full of lobbyists who are paid to be there on one single issue. They want people who engage on the global sense of what are we doing right, what are we doing wrong, what kind of feedback can you come up with, and are there innovations that can come from this dialogue. And I think the fact that we have twice delivered high quality discussions with amazing companies and great leaders, I think we'll continue to make sure our voice is heard. To answer the same question that you asked Wayne, I think it was many of the things that we heard from others, I think resonated to things that are affecting Madison, and certainly the issues that were raised by our business leaders resonated with the other people in the room. Many times when I heard our delegation bringing up issues, I saw people nodding their head. Yeah. There was a company out of Ohio that was a medical device manufacturer, and the issues he was raising, you could have gone to Research Park here, and every person would have given you that same, the same hassles and issues that they were having. I think the only thing that probably didn't resonate to maybe Wisconsin was a woman wanted to do marijuana tourism.
Not yet. Maybe it hasn't resonated. Give us time. Am I right, Scott? Did CEO Jack Salsweeter go out with you as well?
That's correct. Yeah, yeah. And I thought, kind of in keeping with some of the other responses here, one of the concerns that we have, and I heard this echoed across the room, and we had a really good discussion around concerns that businesses have about whether they're going to be able to attract and retain skilled workers. And there was a really good discussion about what the government can do to support that. Obviously, if they can help support making sure that there's a trained workforce that we can draw from, that adds to the tax base and ultimately help spur the economy. So I thought that was a really good discussion.
Just out of curiosity, did minimum wage come up?
It did.
Yes.
They discussed it, and they feel that it's on a track that they're going to continue to push to see the minimum wage go up over probably a 3 or 4 year period versus one shock to the system.
Can you characterize the
I think
mood in the room about that?
I think there was it was a good back and forth. I think one of the issues that was raised by, it wasn't raised by our delegation, but from a delegation, I think they were from Pennsylvania, one of the Pennsylvania companies, raised the issue of the minimum wage and the direct effect it was going to have on them, specifically as it pertains to teenagers. Mm-hmm. I think that company was really saying is that I'm not really opposed to looking at a living wage and trying to get the minimum wage to get as close to a living wage as we possibly can, but what's the justification for a 16-year-old trainee who's just building life and skill sets to be earning the same as the single mother who's 35 with 2 kids? And what I thought is that it, separate of any kind of emotional response that the administration might have had about it, that the response was, they didn't actually have an answer for that, and said, we'll get back, let's get back to you and let us think through that, and let's, so I think that was good. The other thing that we got was, a few days ago, the budget committee announced the compromise.
Right. That's
and
right.
they sort of foretold that. I mean, the guy from the Office of Management and Budget said, I expect you're going to see a compromise here in a few days. And so to be able to sort of get that feeling of like, not only that we were sort of the inside, but that peace of mind to say, okay, they really are going to meet the deadline, and then to read it a few days later in the paper.
I think that actually creates hope that maybe issues like immigration reform and tax reform are actually achievable if you bring people together. And I think this meeting can only help the efforts to bring people together to solve problems, and it's very positive.
You mentioned talent, keeping and retaining talent, and it seems to me every time we have that conversation today, immigration reform comes up as a major obstacle to that. And you think the White House is working on that issue?
I think that there was a good discussion around the fact that they actually see that immigration reform can actually result in some immediate revenue raisers in terms of getting more folks on the payroll and increasing the tax base, and they recognize that. So I think that that's something that they're focused on.
You know, and largely this is supposed to be off the record. I mean, funny to be on the record talking about off the record, but so largely it was supposed to be no media, off the record. But one of the things, and I don't think I'm, telling state secrets, but was that one of the things that we heard, and it was you had to catch it, but or for the record, I called it on the record, but that you had to catch it, but the National Senior Advisor on Immigration Policy said we're okay with a piece, with a grouping of legislation that accomplished the same thing as comprehensive overhaul. And so that's been one of the big barriers is like, can you get a comprehensive package done? And them saying to the room of business leaders is that if it comes down to the House has to pass essentially the same thing, but do it in sort of one individual vote per bill, that the White House is going to be okay with that. And so I hadn't heard that publicly before, that the White House was going to be okay if that's the way the House went.
All right, when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about what this means for a 21st century approach to business in the United States. Right after this. I'm back with Zach Brandon, the president of the Greater Madison Chamber of Commerce, Scott Seymour, who is the vice president of corporate and legal regulatory affairs at American Family, and Wayne Harris, the president of 6am Marketing. All three of these gentlemen were in Washington, D.C. last Monday for a briefing with the White House Business Advisory Council, and we're talking about that, in particular the fact that 8 of the 40 members there were from Madison and from the Greater Madison Chamber of Commerce. Again, in January, Madison Magazine is exploring sort of the global, Madison's global footprint in a lot of different ways, and Zach has been interviewed for that piece. But part of the idea is that in 2013, businesses, indeed cities, are needing to act somewhat independent of state governments and federal governments because of the globalness that we live in today and technology. And I'm just wondering, it feels a little like the White House might be acknowledging that it needs to reach out to business, because in a lot of ways, business is moving way faster than government is. Does that sound right, Zach?
I think it is. And I think it was reflected not just in the discussion about trade, but also in the idea of open data and how you use technology. And so we really heard it in various ways that they were acknowledging that local governments were moving at a higher velocity than some of what the state efforts were. But the real opportunity is you can say we're developing a program to do exports or a program to help your business go international or do foreign direct investment. But if it isn't the thought leaders and the business leaders in the local economy helping perpetuate that and drive that, it's not going to happen. And so, Wayne talked about the fact that only 5% of the world's consumers live in the United States, but we know from true data and data forecasting that the economic center of the world is moving away from the United States. It's moving east and south, which tells us that the future economies are going to be east of us, probably India, China, some of the other Asian countries, but Africa, Brazil, the rest of South America create tremendous opportunities for businesses. And if you have a website, you're already international, right? You're already facing international. Now what are you going to do with it?
Scott, in many, many ways, American Family already operates in that realm. And when I think locally about now the investments that American Family is putting into companies doing global business and the new tech stuff, do you get the sense that the White House knows companies like American Family are already doing this? We need to be in touch with them.
Yeah, I mean, my sense was that, in fact, there was this interesting discussion that occurred, I believe, with folks that oversee the Medicare program and the data that they have access to, and discussion about how that data could potentially be used by private business to address potentially rising medical care costs. And so, I mean, to me, I heard some things there that recognize that there is this potential partnership that needs to be developed between government and business, and an interest in trying to continue to explore that.
Yeah. When you know, I'm trying to anticipate people out there who are naturally skeptical, and that's a lot of people. And in part it's because of the media, I acknowledge that, but who think government right now can't get anything done. Sometimes visits like this change your perspective a little bit. Do you have any sense that government's listening to business?
Well, I think just the session itself, you know, gives you that sense. The fact that they were there and they were listening. They asked questions. They asked us to participate. So I do think they're listening, and I do think that they are making strides. I mean, immigration reform, they felt very confident that they'll have that solved in the next 12 months. You know, the Affordable Health Care Act, they feel that long term, although it may not necessarily cut costs, but it will slow the increase in costs. And so they are making strides, and they are, you know, they are listening. You know, they're taking questions. They're offering to get back. They're offering for us. They gave us email addresses so we can continue the conversation with them. So, okay. You know, I had a raised sense that, you know, we do have a voice and there is an opportunity to get involved, and that they are actually accomplishing things.
We got a minute left, Zach. Any last takeaways?
What I liked about this is that we didn't pay to get in. I didn't have to pay a lobbyist to go do this. That they didn't check who we voted for, who we wrote checks to in the last partisan, you know, where our politics were. That we had a diverse group of people who probably supported a lot of different people in different elections. And everybody got equal opportunity and equal airtime into what they wanted to help solve. And you know, sometimes we had very personalized issues that our businesses needed to focus on. Sometimes there were big global issues. But to me, that's the big takeaway. Is this is where Madison wants to be on the national stage, on the global stage, engaging with policymakers, with the White House, you know, with international decision makers, and touting what's going on here and making sure that our voice is heard, so that things that happen at the governmental level or at the international level are reflected in success here.
Quick story: Marshall Lindsay may have
we think there will be
made it possible for some of them to come here.
Well, there's a program at the federal level, and ironically, the night before we were just having a discussion. Once we arrived about what we want to talk about, and Marcia said, "Wouldn't it be great if we had the ability to bring government people into our businesses so they could see what it's like to, on a day-to-day basis to run the business?" So we get there, and they're talking about a fellowship program, the White House Innovation Fellowship. And during the dialogue, Marcia said, "What if we reversed it?" And it became, "We should try it." And so we'll see where it goes.
All right, thanks, gentlemen. We're going to come back and wrap up For the Record right after this. My thanks to Zach Brandon, Wayne Harris, and Scott Seymour for being here today. Next week, we will talk racial disparities, budget, and other county issues with Dane County Executive Joe Parisi. Have a great weekend. We'll see you next Sunday.